Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Warm welcome from Team MLCF Lucknow. Delightful to be together on this sixth session of MLCF titled Lesser Known Tales from 1962 War. For we Indians, and especially for us in uniform, 1962 war is epoch making with sense of loss and maybe anguish for our political miscalculations and strategic blunders. Our historians and military writers have written more than 100 books in last 59 years since Indochina 1962 war and are still at work to assimilate the lessons learned against the technological advances and infrastructure development. However, there are lesser known tales of 1962. They give altogether different perspective to what has been already known to us. In today's session, we have two authors of repute who have tried doing this through their two books, Bomdila and Ki Baatein. Novel Bomdila is written by Pune-based Dr. Avinash Biniwale, who is a retired professor of German language from Elphinstone College, Mumbai. As part of his social service, he spent considerable time in Northeast and conducted German classes in Manipur University. A linguistic and a scholar of many languages, he has authored 71 books. His novel Bomdila has been translated in 7 languages, including Sanskrit. Deservingly, he has been recipient of many literary awards. Bomdila उन्हीं के शब्दों में उन अनगिनत अनामिक साधारण समझे जाने वाले असाधारण वीरों की गाथा है जिन्होंने 1962 के युद्ध को वास्तव में झेला था. The second author, ladies and gentlemen, as panelist today is Dr. Neelum Saran Gour, Prayagraj-based Professor Neelum Saran is an English writer of fiction and has authored 13 books. There is universality in Professor Neelum's writings. Her book, 62 की बातें, एक अलग समाज को दर्शाती हैं. A fact-based and analytical, woven artistically. In conversation with these two eminent authors is Major General Hemant Kumar Singh, who has been the project director of Arunachal Martyrs Memorial Committee from 2015 to 2018. During this time, he has done extensive research on 1962 war, facts, places, and about the beliefs. He also has to his credit the thorough research on Battle of Chham in 1965 and 1971 war. He has recently completed his research project on war memorials, commemorations, and remembrances in India under the aegis of USI Delhi. Now I hand you over to General for further proceedings, please.
Adab to everybody from Lucknow. 1962 Sino-Indian War has evoked a great response It was a period which was inked by political intrigue, power assertions, insecurity, a questionable leadership in the time of war, and a huge public engagement. Perhaps when we lose a war, more literature is written about it. It is alive even today. Just over last 2 years, 3 films have been made. One on PVC Jogender Singh, one on MVC Jaswant Singh, and recently in the month of February, a web series was made on the Battle of Rezangla and Galwar. And just about a few days back, we had another book coming out on the Battle of Rezangla. As more and more information is released, one finds more books coming out. Most are political and military narratives written by experts and military people. In due course, a few fictions, accounts, and films have also come out. Notably among those were Krishan Chanda's Ek Gadha Nefa Mein, Escape from Namka Chu, a love story by Brigadier Banot, I Was a Prisoner of War in China by Lieutenant Colonel K.N. Bakshi, Namka Chu and other lesser told stories by Brigadier Lakshman Singh, and the films Rakta Tilangam in Tamil and Hakikat and Tezpur, a documentary. A few books and plays have also been written in the Assamese language. So today we are discussing these 2 books about which Brigadier BN has already talked about. But these are essentially written by academicians and non-military people. It is a civilian perspective, but written after much research. These are therefore in true sense, factual accounts told in a story form. They are a bit hatke hain. These are must-read books which sort of complete the narration of 1962. And our first panelist is Dr. Neelum Saran Gour. Her latest book, Raga Janki, was recently awarded by the Hindu as the best non-fiction. That was in 2019. She was also appeared as a humor columnist for Hindustan Times. Dr. Neelum is a child from a Bengali mother and a Hindi-born father, and was exposed to many languages and cultural influences in her childhood. So, Dr. Neelum, 1962, talking of 1962, is not just about India-China war. That is just a backdrop. As it is mentioned in the title, there are many commentaries in the book about those fateful days. The book is different than all other books on 1962, yet it catches every aspect possible in the best way. So, best way to tell us about your book is to read certain passages which you find interesting. And then we will be on an even keel to take on the questions further. Dr. Neelum.
Can you hear me? The book was written. Hello. Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you. You can
Hello?
keep talking. We can hear you.
Yes. The book was originally written in English, and I translated it into Hindi as Ki Baatein. Originally, it was called Speaking of 62. So, actually, I'm looking at it bilingually, and the first passage I've chosen is about curfew. You know how we as small children experienced curfew, blackout in the days at the peak of the war. I will read out a small paragraph. Those nights of curfew and blackout were lovely. Everything seemed condensed by the darkness and crusted over with stars. Not a moon in the sky, not a street light upon a pole. The smudged trees and houses huddled together in strange crouching shapes, claimed now as the original property of the night. All that the eyes could do was hazard at suspected or possible forms. Not a chink of light escaped from door or window or thatched crack. Only the crazy people held up its illumined leaves, chilled and misted above the black mound of the roof. Sometimes footsteps sounded, several pairs, the dragging, dry slur of shoes and slippers scraping upon the ground, and muffled voices muttered, drawing closer, growing louder. Throats were cleared, and torches were cautiously snapped on, and the piercing beam quarried a sharp tunnel through the dense wall of the dark, and everything was suddenly simplified and sorted out. And a sweet, sharp whistle sounded close ahead as the curfew patrol went past. It seemed unthinkable that a mere bomb could presume to disturb the deep content of this darkness. The second passage that I have taken, I will read it out in Hindi. It's about the time when small boxes, saving boxes appeared in the shops for children to collect money for the armed forces. As a child, I had such a box. And my child characters, there are 6 characters, buy this box and plan a kind of a movement in their neighborhood to collect money, to visit the neighbors and to gather funds for the army. So the politics between the children and the hilarious consequences are covered in the following extract. Translated by me as Basit Ki Baatein from the original. रातों रात वो सुंदर टीन के गुल्लक प्रकट हुए, दुकानों की खिड़कियों में उनके पहाड़ सजे होते, स्कूल में खाने की छुट्टी के समय बिकते छोटे रंग बिरंगे षटकोण वाले गुल्लक मॉर्टन ट्रॉफियों के टिन जैसे, पर और भी सुंदर, उन पर ताले लगे होते और एक छल्ले पर 2 प्यारी प्यारी चाबियां भी साथ मिलती थी। ऊपर एक पतली सी दरार थी पैसे डालने के लिए और उनके चिकने चमकते ऊपरी भाग पर ऊंचे हिमालय पर्वत का चित्र था, सात्विक बर्फ से ढका, और उसके सामने राइफल ताने एक अकेले सैनिक की परछाई, और ये शब्द लिखे थे, राष्ट्र सुरक्षा संगठन, नेशनल डिफेंस फंड। संगठन से कहते हैं, हमने पूछा और हमें बताया गया। राष्ट्र व्यवस्था में हमारे स्थान की पुष्टि हो गई और इस सम्मान के लिए हम बेहद आभारी थे कि भारतवर्ष के बच्चे भूले नहीं गए। हमने अपनी जमा पूंजी का संचय 10 रुपए से शुरू किया, जिसे सिक्कों में हमारे माँ बाप ने हमें दान किया था। बर्तन मांजने वाली मेहरिन ने 50 पैसों का योगदान दिया, क्लास टीचर ने 1 रुपया दिया, और आप यूं समझिए कि हमारे अपने नेशनल डिफेंस फंड ने अपनी प्रारंभिक उड़ान ले ली। पर इस दृष्टिकोण से टुलटुल सहमत न था। टुलटुल वाज वन ऑफ द चिल्ड्रन। अच्छा, उसने मुंह बनाया उंगलियों पर हिसाब करते हुए, बस 11 रुपए और 50 पैसे। 11 रुपए और 50 पैसों में बंदूक, हवाई जहाज और बम आएंगे। टुलटुल ने कुछ और बड़े पैमाने पर कल्पना की थी। अभी तो बा के दोस्त लोग भी बाकी हैं और हमारे पड़ोसी भी और क्लास के बच्चे तो एक दमड़ी न देंगे, कंजूस मक्खी चूस, सब अपने अपने फंड इकट्ठा करने में लगे हैं। तो बचे पिताजी के दोस्त, माँ की बुनाई मंडली और पड़ोस के लोग। भाषण तैयार करना पड़ेगा, एक संकल्प लिखना पड़ेगा, टुलटुल ने गंभीरता से कहा। तदनुसार बहुत विचारने के बाद हमने लिखा, देश के लिए मर जाए। बड़े बड़े अक्षरों पर वाटर कलर की सुंदर बेल से सजाया गया। अब टुलटुल बोला, अपने अपने दस्तखत खून से करने होंगे, जैसे वो स्टूडेंट लीडर लोग कर रहे हैं। आ लीची, तू शुरू कर। ना, लीची ने दृढ़ता से इनकार किया और पीछे हट गई। तुम शुरू करो ना, तुम सबसे बड़े हो और आदमी हो। लेडीज फर्स्ट, टुलटुल ने चिढ़कर कहा। तुम बॉस ठहरे, चलो शुरू करो। हम सब ने टुलटुल को प्रोत्साहित किया। अच्छा चलो बोना, तुम शुरू करो ना। यह था बोना का एकाकी शब्दांश जो बड़े निर्णायक स्वर से उच्चारण किया गया। मैं तो छोटा सा बच्चा ही हूँ। टुलटुल ने घूमकर सबको गुस्से से घूरा। कायरों, वह गुर्राया, एक सुई का चुभना नहीं सह सकते? देश के लिए कैसे मरोगे अगर हाथ में एक सुई तक नहीं भोंक सकते? देखो, अरुण ने कहा, यह सब खून वून का आइडिया छोड़ो, पेंसिल से ही अपना नाम लिख दें और आगे की देखी जाए। इस आकर्षक प्रस्ताव का सबने स्वागत किया। वह बड़े जोर से प्रमाणित हुआ और देश के प्रति वफादारी का इकरार करने का सिलसिला मुकर्रर हुआ। अब टुलटुल बोला, एक रसीद किताबिया चाहिए, जैसी किताबिया वो दशहरा होली का चंदा मांगने वाले लड़के हाथ में लिए रहते हैं। नाम लिखो, रकम लिखो, अपना नाम साइन करो और आधा पन्ना फाड़ कर दे दो। मुझे शक है कि शानदार अदाकारी के साथ आधा पन्ना फाड़ने और मेहरबान डोनेशन दाता को वापस पकड़ाने का परिदृश्य ही टुलटुल की कल्पना को लुभा रहा था। तो एक छोटी सी किताबिया चिपका कर बनाई गई और आलपिन भोंक कर आसानी से फाड़ने का इंतजाम किया गया। इसके बाद हमने अपना संचय अभियान शुरू किया, जो आने वाली घटनाओं का हिसाब लेते हुए हमारे लिए बड़ा खट्टा मीठा अनुभव साबित हुआ। हम दरवाजे की घंटी बजाते या सकली पीटते या दरवाजे पर लात चलाते या जोर जोर से शोर मचाने के मौके के अनुसार। फिर जब घर के निवासी प्रकट होते, टुलटुल अपना भाषण आरंभ करता और बाकी लोग उसके प्रवाह में टिप्पणियां लगाते चलते और उसका ध्यान भंग भी करते रहते। नमस्ते चाची या मौसी या मामी या मामा या चाचा या ताऊ जी या नाना जी, पड़ोस के समस्त सदस्य इन्हीं किसी एक दर्जे में आते थे। जैसा कि आप जानते हैं, हमारा देश संकट में है। हम पर हमलावर हमला कर रहे हैं, चीनी हमलावर। वो हमारे घरों को छीन लेंगे। चुप रह तू। हाँ, जैसा कि मैं कह रहा था, हम लोगों पर चीनी हमलावर हमला कर रहे हैं और हमारे सिपाही बॉर्डर पर मर रहे हैं, जैसे जैसे चक्की में पिसता आटा। और हमको बंदूकें चाहिए और हवाई जहाज और उसी तरह की चीजें। और इसलिए यहाँ पर गुल्लक पेश होता, दस्तखत करवाने वाला कागज और रसीद बुक। 1 मिनट, एक बुजुर्ग बोले। उन्होंने कागज उठाया, मोटे मोटे उल्लू के आंख नुमा चश्मों के अंदर से उसे झांक कर पढ़ा। क्या आप लोग मुझको शहादत का न्योता दे रहे हैं? जी हाँ। मेरा मतलब है जी नहीं नाना जी, मेरा मतलब है कि हम सबको देश के लिए शहीद हो जाना चाहिए। ओहो, वो बुजुर्ग बोले, लेकिन अगर हम सब शहीद हो गए तो देश में कौन बचेगा? नहीं शुक्रिया। फिर उनकी आंखों में हंसी की चमक छलकी। खैर, अगर 1 रुपया देकर मुझको तुम बच्चों से अपनी जान बचाने की इजाजत मिल जाए तो मुझे यह सौदा मंजूर है। और बड़ा सा रुपया का सिक्का झनझनाता जा गिरा गुल्लक में। That was my second extract written in Hindi. The third one is particularly important because I was a personal witness to the time when gold was donated by the Government of India for the National Defense Fund. I lived in Allahabad, very close to Anand Bhavan, and I personally witnessed Vijay Lakshmi Pandit ji and Indira Gandhi standing there, and it laid in front, and the gold, pile of gold rising on it. So this is about that meeting. We were there with our parents in that huge crowd. Beneath the fluttering tricolor and the loudspeakers, there arched across the facade of the lovely old villa those large white and gold banners. Ornaments for armaments, and India needs you now. And she is so beautiful in her ice blue sari and her short wavy hair. How briskly she walked. And when she spoke, it was with such courtesy, such infallible, endearing earnestness that the crowd went mad. For wasn't she practically daughter to our city? If there can be first ladies, then she was the first daughter of the land, and there was elegance and enchantment in her slender form. She stood like an ivory statuette with her fine golden smile, hands folded. On the ground before the podium was spread a white khadi sheet, and hundreds of women came forward with their gold, with bangles, chains, rings, small anklets, combs, and tossed them into the sheet, and the pile grew higher and higher. So many women, plump, rotund mamas with a rolling walk in garish greens and pinks, with their teeth all out in clumsy smiles. Bent and rickety old widow ladies with arms like sticks, demure little girl brides with their pallus over their heads, giggling frumps, silver-haired ladies with composed faces, and funny old slatterns with crazy beaming eyes, hump-backed ancients and poised young school moms. And so much gold. Sindbad himself would have been speechless, and King Midas absolutely at home. Who would have thought that the obscure women of the country had so much gold tucked away? It lay in a precious pile, gold much adored, gold which came from kindly parents and adoring husbands, and dead grandmothers, and living mothers-in-law, and unknown aunts and great aunts, relics of old love, insignia of silent power. Crafted by matchless goldsmiths in firelit dens in tangled black alleys, sculpted into exquisite classical shapes, and it would all be melted down to pay for alms. Even our mother, she who was so emotional about her gold, went awkwardly forward with a heavy $5 bracelet, gave it away, and felt no pang. Thank you very much. So much for my readings.
Thank you so much, ma'am. You have given us three different kind of flavors. Actually, your book has got so many flavors, and possibly the political commentary which is there, including some military aspects, are to perfection. I would say the book is basically about the people of Allahabad, your family, your friends, the kids who discover 1962 as a, while communicating with each other. You wrote the book in 1992. That is good, 30 years after the war. Was it written in anger or frustration or just a very vivid memory? Or was there any objection from the government side? Because that time governments were not so keen that the books on the lost wars are written. Dr. Neelum.
Contrary to anger or frustration, the book was written as an expression of childhood joy, because as a creative work, it was the product of that intersection between memory, imagination, and research. There is a phase of childhood for everybody which remains enlarged, magnified, and amplified, because everything is vivid, every impression is unforgettable, every sensory detail is preserved. And the 1962 war was very much part of my larger childhood experience. I do not have anybody from the armed forces in my family, in my extended family too. But just the experience of the seasons, the festivals, the birthdays, and the excitement of the war, because to me as a child, wars only happened in books, in the Ramayana, in the Mahabharata, in ancient Troy, in ancient Rome, in histories. And here was something which was lived history, and it was happening in the direct present. So for other children like me too, the war was a kind of a game happening far away, and it was a dramatized game which our imagination seized on and played upon. So I would say that my book is about 62, and it is also about my personal journey, because everything has been internalized in that. So the march of time between June 1962 and November 1962 is described as the changing of seasons, personal festivals, pranks between children, school politics, and everything with a sense of comedy. So I would say that it is a record of a chapter of my childhood, witnessed with great interest, with childlike, wide-eyed interest. Uh, why should there have been any objection from the government when the book was first published in it was released in 1995? It received great reviews, but nothing political. People applauded the writing, people applauded the story, the artistic side of it. But there was not even a murmur of any kind of criticism for the politics of the book. Maybe I wasn't that important a writer to be noticed, or it is also that those were more tolerant times. That's my answer.
You have described the mood of the nation that time, from children to elder, and everybody was engaged in the process of war and what was happening. You also talked about this play by the children. The ending of that collection of money by children was not explained. I mean, you were yet to cover it. Possibly, we collected about 80 crore worth of wealth in terms of rupees, as well as the jewelry and the gold. Almost everybody contributed. It is also said that some of this money went missing, especially in the earlier times. And so the India Defence Fund is shrouded in many shades of black. Even today, if you want to research it, you will not get any detail which is worth the salt. And number of more laws were brought in so that the collections are regularized and proper receipts are given. But it was sad that some of the money went away, and still 80 crore was almost 1/3 of the defense budget that time. So it's very come out very beautifully through your children collecting the money, and in the end they run into a similar dilemma. When the money is in your pocket, you decide what to do with it. So do you think people or the nation has a right to know each and everything about collection of money of India Defence Fund?
Of course, absolutely, because there has to be complete transparency in governance, and all those dark chapters of history which lie sealed must be opened. That's what a mature democracy is about. So definitely, but I do not know if there are any records, because I don't think those who pocketed the money would have exposed their trail. I don't know how that can be done.
Okay, you defined the ecosystem of which prevailed in 1962. How the children grew, choti baatein, vivid descriptions of rain, kitchen being made into a sand model room by your father, and lily ghodis which were being boxed into the matchboxes, clothes people wore, the husband-wife no joke, and so on. These descriptions are weaved in the most wonderful and expressive way. In between, you talk of climate change and disaster management in passing. In fact, these scenes from the book make it more almost a film-like. It is so graphic. Say something about it. Also, an ecosystem like teacher, parents, or guests coming to the house, or a house always full of communication and engagement, of the type of nurturing which the kids got, some loving bashing. But today things have changed. You are almost growing in a nuclear family all alone. Say something about it.
I was trying to capture the essence of the early 1960s, the late 1950s and early 1960s. And as I said, there is a very strong autobiographical element in the book. Many of the things are, preserved in my own memory as part of my life. And not only my memory, but the memories of others. For example, the kitchen floor, the broken kitchen floor, which which seemed like the Himalayan range, the curve of the Himalayan range was something from my own old bungalow. And we did sit there and have our breakfast. And my father did put marbles and put sticks to show the progress of the army and the Aksai Road. So that comes from fact. There are many things in the book which sound fictional, but which are drawn from my childhood. For example, a rumor went around that the Chinese army had trained monkeys in its ranks. It was all over the place कि चीनियों ने बंदरों को ट्रेनिंग दिया है और वो बंदर जो है वो इतने होशियार है वो राइफल भी संभाल सकते हैं. Now this was very seriously circulating in our areas. This is from my own memory. There are other things. The National Defense Fund box, for example, I had a box and I collected some money. I collected 56 rupees. And well, fortunately, I did donate it. I do not know whether those who received the donation were equally ethical about it. I mean, that's not in my power to record. Then, as I said, that I witnessed that scene with Indira Gandhi and Vijay Lakshmi Pandit standing there, hands folded. So it was a personal childhood. The Lili Ghori, the Bil Bahuti, the way the monsoon came, all those things are very, very vivid to the eyes of a child. Each of us has our own chamber of childhood in our mind. And we record all these impressions cinematically so that every sound is still audible in our memory, every shade of light, every tone of voice, every scrap of conversation, it's all there preserved in our minds. So the ecosystem that you talk about, Allahabad could not be called a small town, but this was very, very intensively local. It's not just a town, it's just one locality of the town, Colonelganj. And there is a strong sense of community. And when we talk of community, like neighbors coming in, carrying newspapers and sitting down and discussing the news, that is something which many of us may remember. पड़ोसी मिलकर एक दूसरे से राजनीति डिस्कस करते थे, हेडलाइंस डिस्कस करते थे, बड़ा एक्सप्रेस करते थे. It was a participative and a very, very because like I said, sense of community means active communing, and that's why we get the word communication. So the book has a lot of chatter, a lot of banter, a lot of ventilation of opinion and friendly combats in argument. I also think that the only source of entertainment is the radio. And at that point of time, the radio was very attractive only because of the news bulletins that it brought. So conversation was an art. It was something which kept people busy. It was a bond between people. So that's why I think when writing about the early 90s in a small town, all these things were very, very important. Like I said, these are not just my memories, but the memories of several people. And like I told you earlier, the mind of an author is like a sponge. You know, your antennae are all sensitized to catch whatever you can from whatever story you hear about the war. That's how I get the little portion about Chow and Lai, about Jackie Kennedy's visit. You know, those people who were players in this great political drama. But everything in my book is seen as funny, comic, because it's all wonky, seen through the eyes of children. Until, of course, the children slowly discover how the concept of the other can be born. Somebody who is different, and difference is underlined in terms of race, in terms of religion, class, culture, food, language, gender. All these things are not theoretical, but they slowly wake up in the consciousness of the children under pressure from the times. And that is also when corruption appears. And finally, the children have this very brutal interface with the reality of the war in the lynching scene, when they see a solitary and harmless Chinaman being lynched by a mob on the day of the final defeat. So to answer your question, in a certain way, it was a different ecosystem. There was great bonding between individuals. There was great sharing between individuals. There was not a culture of silence. At the same time, I would say that there is much common between that time and our time. And I now, when I read this book, my own book, 30 years down the line, I am very surprised at the commonalities that I can spot between then and now.
Okay, thank you so much. Coming to the last two questions, you already talked about one of the Chinese young person being attacked. You brought out the humanitarian factor in your book. There are two episodes. One is about the Chinese man in London, and one is about the two students in the class. And sometimes there is a tendency to make anyone as our enemy, probably just to vent your frustration. What is the psychology behind this, and how do you see it? These two are very moving elements in your book.
I think there is a natural, I think it's part of our evolutionary programming to separate ourselves in a spirit of defense from others. Just as there is a spirit of cooperation, the spirit of conflict is essentially part of the living condition, more than the human condition, the living condition. And as a child grows, both these forces manifest. So the story about the Indian in London who is attracted to a piece of porcelain in a Chinese emporium, but whose spirit of loyalty to his country forbids him from buying it. This is actually taken from the experience of a teacher of mine who actually underwent this kind of dilemma in London. And he was the one who told me that the Chinese sales girl came up to him and whispered, politics is temporary and art is permanent. And I did find it to be a very moving episode. So with his permission, I used it in my book. There really were Chinese children in school with me, and we did persecute them, I say to my shame. But the lynching is something that didn't actually happen. That was entirely fictionally created. And sorry about this, there's a power cut and I'm trying to adjust a table lamp. The lynching is something which I created out of my imagination, because I asked the question, where would this lead? And this is where it led, when a sense of frustration blinded the mob to the harmlessness of that one solitary Chinaman who was not China. He was settled in India. He was an Indian citizen, but he happened to be a man of Chinese origin. So I would say that these primal forces within us, humanitarian as well as suspicious of all others, these are the sources of both conflict as well as reconciliation in our world. And at a microcosmic level, within the mind of a child, we see the confrontation of these forces. There are 6 children, and in the politics between them, we see these larger forces being born. They seem very funny. We see forces gradually gathering momentum. That's roughly what I had in mind 30 years back when I wrote it.
Now we have Professor Avinash Biniwale, Brigadier BN had talked about him. So we'll straight away get on to the discussion with him. But while we are doing that, 2 things. He used to write almost 12 columns a week in the Marathi newspaper, Lok Satta, and There is an award-winning novel called Jai Kailash on Indo-Tibetan region, which may be of interest to many people today. It is written in Marathi, but an English translation is in the progress. Professor Biniwale is suffering from a bit of Alzheimer, which you can see, but he has been courageous enough to appear on our platform. So thank you so much for that, sir. Sir, your book is written on the ground level, what was happening. And a lot of things which are written, actually, they're in 2-3 categories. And one category is spying, one is espionage and subversion, and one is the bonding between the soldiers and how they were handicapped and how they reached back, things like that. So what made you write this book? You're not a soldier. So how come you came to write such an authentic book?
बात ऐसी हुई कि मुझे घूमने का शौक है। कॉलेज की 4 महीने की छुट्टी हुआ करती थी, समर वेकेशन एंड विंटर वेकेशन, 1 month. So I used to wander throughout the country for 4 months every year. And I spent a lot of time in the Northeast, also in Kashmir region. So that was an opportunity for me to know the people. And naturally, I used to talk with these soldiers. और मैं हमेशा अनरिजर्व कंपार्टमेंट में यात्रा करता था, क्योंकि वहां पर लोगों से मिलने का मौका मिलता है। तो एक बार कोल्हापुर में ऐसा हुआ कि श्रीकांत कैरेक्टर जो है बोमदिला का, उससे मेरी मुलाकात हो गई। जब मुझे पता चला कि वो सोल्जर था और मैंने उनसे पूछा कि आपके एक्सपीरियंस आप बता सकते हैं क्या, तो उसने कहा हाँ जरूर बता सकता हूँ। तो मैं उनके घर गया था और वहां जाने पर मुझे उन्होंने अपनी पूरी कहानी बताई कि कैसे वो आर्मी में भर्ती हुआ और कैसे वो बोमदिला पहुंचा और बोमदिला से वापस आया जीता। ये सारी कहानी उन्होंने मुझे 15-20 मिनट में बताई थी। तब मुझे ऐसा लगा कि ये सब लिखना चाहिए। उसके बाद वाली वेकेशन में मैं तेजपुर गया था और मुझे एक बंदा मिला, मतलब वो चित्तरंजन। उसके बाद वाली वेकेशन में मैं श्रृंगेरी गया था कर्नाटक में, वहां पर मुझे सोमैया मिला। तब मुझे ऐसा लगा जब सोमैया से मिला कि मुझे ये सारी कहानियां लिखनी चाहिए, इसमें कुछ समान सूत्र है, कॉमन थिंग है। उसके बाद वाली वेकेशन में फिर से मैं आसाम में था और वहां पर मुझे कई लोगों से मिलने का मौका मिला। टी स्टेट पर गया था मैं, कई टी स्टेट पर, वहां कैसी पार्टियां हुआ करती थी इसके बारे में मैंने सुना उन मैनेजर से। तो मैंने धीरे धीरे लिखना शुरू कर दिया। हर साल में घूमता था 2-4 महीने और उसमें कुछ ऐड होता था। बाद में मैं जब बोमदिला गया था लेट 70s, तब अर्ली 70s, तब मैंने वो बंकर देखे थे कि जिसके बारे में आप किसी को पता नहीं है। 83 में मैंने एक बंकर देखा भी था आखिरी, अब एक भी वहां पर नहीं है। तो ये सारी बातें जो हैं तो मैंने लिखना शुरू कर दिया और मुझे ऐसा लगा कि ये सारी कहानियां अलग अलग से नहीं लिखनी चाहिए। इसमें एक सूत्र जो है उसे अगर उस सूत्र के आसपास अगर हम रचना करें तो ये एक नॉवेल हो सकता है। इसलिए मैंने उस परिस्थिति में लिखने की कोशिश की और ये बोमदिला पूरी हुई और मुझे वो लगती है क्योंकि ये सारे कैरेक्टर जो है वो मैंने देखे हैं, उनके साथ में रहा हूँ, उनके साथ कई दिन बिताए मैंने। तो मेरे लिए ये सारे जीते जागते लोग हैं। और बाकी हिस्ट्री के बारे में भी मैंने वहाँ के लोकल लोगों से सुना है, क्योंकि जब भी मैं जाता हूँ मैं लोकल किसी आदमी के घर में रहता हूँ, मैं कभी होटल में नहीं रहता।
सर सो नाइस। आपने बताया है कि you met the characters on the ground, and that is why your book is translated into 7 languages, and especially people of Assam and Kannada and they all loved it.
Gujarati.
Now,
Yeah.
coming to the very important aspect about which people have not written, and it needs to be discovered, that is the aspect of espionage, the spying ring of Chinese, and the subversion which was created. Little is known or written about this aspect, but there are many silent words which are spoken around. You are perhaps one of the first authors to fictionalize this aspect. I am also aware that in Hong Kong, that a lady was there and she was looking for her husband in front of churches, in front of in some beggar places, in some marketplaces, who was actually had served in Tawang sector. So why was she doing there,
Acha.
searching for her husband who was supposed to be fighting war here? These are very intriguing questions. Then in your book, there is an Indian Army officer, Colonel Balbir, and he is
Balbir.
passing information to Chinese for gratification, and he's constantly doing it, and he has bought lands and golds way back in the hinterland in India, and now he's looking to buy a tea garden. So, and then finally he's killed at the bridge number 4 next
Yeah.
to just before you reach Sela. Tell me how authentic you feel is all this, because this perception has not been talked about, especially almost everything was known to Chinese. They had infiltrated, they had cut your wire, they were talking in Hindi, and they were infiltrating into your radio nets, and they were there as laborers. They were coming to your message. So everything was there. How authentic is
Yeah.
this? Because it can be dangerous.
According to my information, because I have lived in at many places with the locals, and these are the stories I have told by local people. वो जो बताने वाले थे, वो कोई ट्रेंड आदमी नहीं थे, बिल्कुल सीधे साधे गांवार लोग थे, लेकिन उन्होंने जो देखा, उन्होंने जो सुना, वो उन्होंने मुझे बताया, और उसके आधार पर मैंने लिखा. तो इसका प्रूफ न मेरे पास है, न उनके पास है.
हाँ, बड़ी अच्छी बात है, लेकिन आपने बोला है कि कर्नल बलबीर को सभी लोग जानते थे कि वो क्या कर रहे हैं.
जी जी.
Coming to the next part, one of the greatest ambushes ever laid in the modern era was in Nukmai Dong, which is between Sela and just below Senghe as you come down to the valley. It is a 4-kilometer long ambush, and as per your book and as per other records also, Chinese had prepared it so very well. They had made bunkers on either side, and one side is a river flowing, and the villagers were possibly aware of it, but our own Indian army was not aware of it, despite the fact that every battalion had been assigned an officer or a person from the IB. How is it possible that next to the main road, a 4-kilometer ambush is being prepared for almost a week, and there is a village next door, and you're not secured your line, and then one fine day panic is created, and almost 500 or even more people die in that ambush in just a matter of few hours. This information, actually, this operation has generally been suppressed. So please tell us something about it.
रास्ते से मुश्किल से 10-15 फुट पर एक बंकर था, जो आखिरी था, जो मैंने 83 में देखा था. बिल्कुल रास्ते के पास ही था, हाईवे के पास, और किसी ने नहीं देखा. ये मेरी समझ में नहीं आता कभी. ये समझ में आते हुए भी मतलब देखा होगा, लेकिन उसने रिपोर्ट नहीं किया, जो कंसर्न पर्सन था, निग्लेक्ट कर दिया. It's a very dangerous thing for us.
So I hope, actually one has to read the book to understand that part. Coming to the last question,
Yeah.
आप पानी पीजिए तब तक. You have shown there is a great bonding amongst the soldiers. The last few chapters of the book are devoted to the escape of a few soldiers who are frustrated because they did not get proper chance or opportunity to fight the enemy in terms of equipment and fighting as a whole. Perhaps all the resources were frittered away. And these soldiers are exhausted to the limit. They're injured, their shoes are worn out, they face the brunt of cold, rain, and animals like joke and flies and snakes were encountered, their shoes were tattered and clothes worn out. Yet they show a great sense of bonding laced with survival instinct. The description of one of them offering his wife's letter
Yeah.
to help create an essential fire is really touching, you know. What are your impressions of the Indian soldiers of that time? Generally, we feel they were most capable and they could have held on, but somewhere in the leadership level we faltered.
जी मैं उस पीरियड के जितने भी लोगों से मिला हूँ, मतलब सोल्जर से, हर एक ने यही कहा हम नहीं हारे. इंडियन आर्मी का जीत हो सकती थी, सरकार हारी है, हम नहीं हारे, अभी मौका ही नहीं मिला लड़ने का. हमारे सोल्जर बहुत अच्छे ही थे, इसमें कोई शक नहीं है.
With that, sir, I will thank you so much. And as we wind up, there are a few questions. And
बात मैं कहना चाहूँगा,
हाँ हाँ बिल्कुल बिल्कुल सर.
हमारे सोल्जर्स जो हैं, मतलब पिछले लगभग 40-50 सालों से मैं उनसे मिल रहा हूँ कहीं ना कहीं पूरे भारत में, तो बहुत अच्छे लोग हैं हमारे. मतलब जो फौजी है, अफसर नहीं, नॉन ऑफिसर, वो बहुत अच्छे लोग हैं जो देश की सेवा के लिए आर्मी में जाते हैं, अपनी इच्छा से जाते हैं. वहाँ की प्रलोभन कोई नहीं उनके लिए. मुझे जर्मनी में मौका मिला था कई सैनिकों से मिलने का, तो मैंने वहां पर देखा कि लोग कुछ फायदा कर पाने के लिए आर्मी में जाते हैं. 2 साल की उनकी कंपलसरी मिलिट्री सर्विस होती है, लेकिन उसके बाद क्या फायदे मिलते हैं ये देखते हैं. हाल ही में मैंने ईरान में, मुझे मौका मिला था कुछ सैनिकों से मिलने का. वहां पर भी मैंने देखा हर बंदा गिनता है कि क्या मुझे मिलेगा, मेरा फायदा कैसे होगा. लेकिन हमारे फौजी जो हैं वो ऐसा कभी नहीं सोचते, तो अपनी मातृभूमि के बारे में सोचते हैं. तो हमारे सैनिक जो है वो बहुत अच्छे हैं, ऐसे सैनिक मैंने और कहीं नहीं देखे.
So nice, sir. That is
Yes, thank you.
a great observation coming from you, and that it shows how the civilians feel about the soldiers and the army. One last question: do you think more information of 1962 should be released to public? It's been almost 60 years.
I think the Home Ministry should take this decision,
Okay.
because there is always a possibility of misusing the information.
Okay, that's a very good point. And there is a possibility for that. Now, I will just ask a few questions which have emerged. And one is an observation by Azam Gill. The Chinese monkey business surfaced in 1965 and 1971 in Pakistan. China was supposed to have sent trained monkeys that walked in front of the advancing Pakistani tanks on the Western Front and removing mines from their path, and so on. So a very interesting point. And secondly, it is puzzling that a 4-kilometer long ambush prepared so early went unnoticed. So there are no more questions. So I would, as the moderator of today's show, thank you, sir, and thank Dr. Neelum for coming and enriching us. It has been a most fruitful discussion, and it is quite different than a normal discussion on the 1962 war. And these books must be read because they bring a wonderful perspective. And we are honored. And we'll request now Brigadier B.N. Singh to kindly sum up the session of today.
Thank you, sir. And thank you very much, Professor Avinash and Professor Neelum Saran Gour, Madam. Bomdila and Ki Baatein have colored our spectrum of knowledge as never before. Ma'am, you have not only lived through your childhood, but you have invoked our own memories in that form. So impactful has been your narration in the books, and now your engrossing conversation enriches us equally well. Thanks, General HK sir. You not only kept the discussion flowing, but also added from your vast knowledge based on your extensive research on the subject. Thanks, our esteemed audience. We at Military Literature and Cultural Festival Foundation are always energized with your encouraging response. Our next session would be on 16th October on the topic War as seen from the pen of women writers. Until then, goodbye and thank you all once again.